If you live in a British city, especially Birmingham or London, chances are you'll have come across pirate radio, whether you wanted to or not. It's estimated there are around 150 illegal stations in the UK today. I'm Trevor Nelson, and I used to be a pirate radio DJ. I grew up in a very working class area of Hackney, East London, and had no formal broadcast training whatsoever. The idea of working for someone like Radio 1 or 2, like I do today, well, I just thought they'd never even look at me. Joining pirate radio in the 1980s gave me my big break. But these days I'm hearing the pirate radio scene has changed dramatically since I was in the game. It's heavily criticised by broadcasting regulator Ofcom for continual interference and links to serious crime like money laundering, drugs and violence. But that's not how I remember pirate radio. So I wanted to take a look for myself at the state of illegal broadcasting in the UK today.
The FM spectrum is a finite resource. There are more people that want to use that spectrum than are able to use that spectrum.
This country would benefit so greatly from allowing the young people with their talent to express themselves.
There are links there with drugs, there are links with gangs. There's evidence that playing a certain song will be a code to people that drugs are ready for collection. So yeah, I mean, it is a growing problem.
Everyone's always got something bad to say. There's always the thing of drugs or violence or making money, or I think someone should just realise that maybe we just want to play music.
If we don't license it, then anarchy will rule over the radio spectrum.
Now, if you saw the Richard Curtis film The Boat That Rocked, you'll know that pirate radio started in the early 60s. Back then, the only way you could hear rock and roll music was a short programme on the BBC once a week. So young music enthusiasts took to the seas, setting up their own stations like Radio Caroline. They avoided Britain's licensing laws by broadcasting to the UK from offshore ships and disused sea forts. It was estimated 10 to 15 million people regularly listened to pirate radio by the time it was made illegal in 1967. Today, broadcasting regulator Ofcom estimates 16% of all Londoners tune into pirate radio, and that's just the people who are aware they're even listening to it. Rinse FM is one of London's most popular ones. Sarah Lockhart runs the station with founder Genius, and she's fully aware of pirate radio's legacy in this country.
Pirate radio has been important to the British industry since the 60s. I mean, if there isn't pirate radio, then the radio industry wouldn't follow. The radio industry has been led by the pirate radio industry. You know, Kiss was a pirate, Choice was a pirate, Radio 1 was set up because of a pirate, XFM was a pirate, One Extra is based on being a pirate.
Back in the mid-80s, we started the Pirate Kiss FM. Now, I thought we were doing it for the right reasons. We were passionate about new, cutting-edge music. These days, I'm still very much involved with youth music, and I know that there are several pirates out there now who are coming from the same place. Rinse FM are one of the few pirates who would talk to us. It's been running for 15 years and has been instrumental in developing youth music movements like grime, dubstep and UK funky. OK, I'm sure there are Radio 4 listeners out there who haven't got the slightest clue what I'm talking about. But it's probably the music your kids are listening to, and it's making a lot of money for the UK music industry. Pirates like Rinse, Flex, Flavour, Rude and Cool FM have helped launch the careers of many artists. Recent successes like Dizzy Rascal, Chipmunk and Tinchy Strider wear their pirate past as a badge of honour. And if you haven't heard of them either, they've had 7 number ones between them.
Some people pay for thrills, but I get mine for free. Man, I'm just living my life, there's nothing crazy about me.
Every time I go to a school or a community centre in inner cities and I ask the kids what they want to do, most of them say, I want to be an MC or I want to be a DJ. And the way they think they can do that is by getting on pirate radio. Here's Genius, the founder of Rinse FM.
It's like a platform, it's the beginning. Most people start on a radio station at maybe 3 o'clock in the morning and they progress and they go on to take a better show and then they might move on and to do other things. You have to start somewhere. This is a great place to start and a great place to see if your music is liked and if you actually want to do it. You wouldn't have this opportunity with standard radio station.
Ras Kwame works with me at the BBC's urban youth station 1Extra.
Pirates are still popular because they offer a more specific choice for me musically and in terms of what they broadcast. Well, I think the raw essence of a guy playing a record and speaking to you in a way that's only familiar to you and your neighbourhood, that will always appeal to people.
Successful music artist Kano cut his teeth as a teenager on pirate stations Flavour and Deja Vu at the beginning of the decade.
If you wasn't on pirate radio, you really just wasn't anything. It was really where we learned our craft. It's been my MC school. It's really where I learned to be better. And I think that prepared me for so much, because when it got to a stage where I made a record and now I had to go and tour this record, I had to go and perform, it was effortless because I was used to performing in front of loads of people, performing knowing loads of people is going to hear it. I wasn't shy. I think a lot of artists that were built from pirate radio, I think will be here for a long time.
Pirate radio has historically led the way with new music. Radio Caroline played the Beatles and the Stones because you couldn't hear them on the BBC. When I worked on Kiss FM in the 80s when it was a pirate, we helped break house music and American hip-hop because legal stations weren't playing it. Rinse FM's Sarah Lockhart again.
I don't know about the rest of the world, but London in particular moves quite quickly with trends and changes. In that area of music, it can change sort of on 6 monthly cycles. From what I can see, the mainstream broadcasters only get involved when they feel like something's very, very established, which could take 10 years or something. Like, for example, with dubstep at the moment, they want to get involved now. It's been around since 2001 and represented on the radio probably since 2002.
DJ Ras Kwame.
The thing about Rinse FM is its presenters are largely made up of music makers, i.e. most of the presenters are producers and DJs. So you can't get much more cutting edge than when the people who make the music and influence the whole scene are actually on air broadcasting their own productions years ahead of release schedule. You know, that's hugely cutting edge and you can't get that anywhere else.
Our audience are young. We want to keep people with an interest in youth, culture and music that appeals to young people. So I think that, especially right now, what with the access to all of the information that kids have got on music with the internet, in the last 5 to 10 years, they're not going to tune into a playlist station and listen to that for a year. Like, they need more information, they need it to have more movement, otherwise they'll get bored of it, you know. How often do Radio 1 have a shake-up? Yearly, if that? We probably change 50% of our roster in a year.
So far, so good. Passionate music fans doing something they love. That's how I remember pirate radio. So what's the problem? Ofcom say they had about 1,000 complaints last year from legal stations and their listeners who said they were being interrupted by pirates transmitting on the same frequency. Worse still, there were complaints about pirate radio stations encroaching on the emergency service frequencies. I met up with Ofcom to find out more. Here's Head of Licensing, Peter Davis. The thing about the emergency services and interrupting with emergency frequencies, I remember that being levelled at us 20 years ago. When I was once a pirate, and obviously I felt very guilty at the thought of that, but I never really heard any evidence to prove that ever happened, that we were cutting into emergency frequencies. Have you got any proof that actually happens?
Yeah, absolutely. We've had 41 cases reported so far this year, and that's both to the fire brigade, to the police, and also to air traffic control. There was a case a couple of years back where London City Airport almost had to be closed because of interference from an illegal broadcaster.
So how do the pirates work? Ofcom's Head of Investigations, Paul Mercer.
Illegal broadcasters operate from the major cities in the UK, generally around the London and the Birmingham areas, but they set up studios in void flats, so they're usually based on council estates, where they play the music, do the DJing and MCing, and that frequency is then retransmitted to another, and they rebroadcast from the higher rise somewhere else in the city, so they get pretty good coverage of probably up to 10-mile radius.
The majority of the 1,000 complaints from last year were due to other interference. Community radio boss Clive Glover made one such complaint.
I'm chairman of Verulam Community Radio. We run a community radio station in St Albans. As a community radio station, we're obviously licensed by Ofcom, and we're actually very low powered by comparison, for example, with BBC stations. And the pirates were obviously using much higher powered equipment, and they were using a channel next to us and basically blotting us out even quite near our transmitter sometimes. And when it got really serious, we had problems with potential advertisers saying, they tuned in and they couldn't hear us. The other thing was we had listeners phoning in complaining either they couldn't hear us or in some cases complaining about the music we were playing. And of course it wasn't the music we were playing, it was the music somebody else was playing.
But are these regular or exceptional occurrences? Sarah at Rinse FM thinks the level of interference is minimal.
I'm not saying that people don't complain, but the people that complain is a teeny-weeny minority, considering the population of London or the area that the pirates are covering.
Tony Collis, boss of former pirate radio station Radio Jackie, agrees.
There is no sense in causing interference because the consequence of that is that the broadcast station will be causing interference to them and they won't be picking up the audience that they want to. It's normally the case that somebody might be listening to a relay of, say, Radio 4 that was meant for Oxford and then travelling into London and trying to listen to it in London, where London is covered by Crystal Palace and Rootham. And they've forgotten to retune their radio. And the channel has been usefully reused. They feed this out to people that there aren't enough channels available, where quite clearly there are. If you take a portable radio and tune across it for yourself, you'll find gaps. And where those gaps are, basically you can fit another station in.
This is an argument that's very difficult for the average person to quite understand, because the pirates all say that there's plenty of space, yet you say there's no space at all. How is it tested? Some people say that your methods of testing it are outdated.
Well, we operate to internationally agreed standards, and the whole of the FM band is planned according to those standards. It might well be that if you're a pirate, you can listen and think, oh, there's a spare frequency, there's nobody on it, why don't I broadcast on that? But what you don't recognise is that actually that causes problems to stations, not necessarily where you're broadcasting, but up the road somewhere.
It's a hard one to call. On the one hand, the number of complaints is fairly low compared to the huge number of nationwide radio listeners. But on the other, Ofcom's own research suggests that only 2% of listeners who experience interference from pirates actually complain. In community radio boss Clive Glover's case, it hardly seems fair.
Yes, we were angry. I mean, we spent 15, 20 years basically campaigning for a station in our area. And when we eventually had the opportunity to bid for a licence, we did so. And obviously we got the licence. We've gone through a huge amount of work to build up the station and so on. And then to find, when we went on air, that people who hadn't done any of that and were basically operating illegally, well, I mean, they're breaking the law. It's illegal.
In 2008, Ofcom helped to convict 28 people for illegal broadcasting. Last year, that figure rose to 33. Ofcom also say there's links to more serious crime than radio interference. The Spectrum Policy Advisor, Jim McNally.
We've dealt in the past with stations where people have been convicted of quite serious crimes as well as the illegal broadcasting, and about 18 months ago a financial investigation into one illegal broadcaster resulted in a confiscation order of around £375,000 being made against the manager and owner of an illegal broadcast station. People involved in illegal broadcasters do use drugs. We don't say that everybody involved in illegal broadcasters uses drugs, but they are prevalent in that particular industry. As far as other crimes are concerned, we've had a number of cases where people have been convicted of possession of firearms. We've had people convicted of money laundering offences, all heavily related to illegal broadcasting.
Now, don't get me wrong, there was stuff going on back in the day. But that all sounds pretty scary, and it's not how I remember pirate radio. We followed Ofcom and the Essex Police on one such raid to find out what goes on.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for coming along today. My name's Andy Cutting. I'm an enforcement officer for Ofcom. Our purpose of today is to execute a search warrant against an illegal broadcast station, otherwise known as a pirate radio station, namely Clash FM, who operate within Essex and Kent. Recently, over the last 6 months, Clash FM have been causing persistent interference to listeners of BBC Radio 4 within the Essex area, and that's the reason that we're here today, to eliminate that interference.
We're now at the Essex Police Complex, and we're awaiting the formation of a convoy to take us to the studio of Clash FM. You can hear it in the radio in the background. Once we move from here, we'll only be about 10 minutes away from getting into the studio and putting an end to this pirate radio station. We've just got out the car. The police have gone into the studio, so they're in there now. Door was open, so there was no banging and shouting. Have you got any phones or anything like that on you two? We're now inside the studio of Clash FM. One person has been arrested and a number of other people are being spoken to. The station's still broadcasting, but in a short while that will be stopped.
The person that is here is just literally just outside the premises with his car, so he's been taken away. He'll be interviewed, and we're going to have a look for any drugs that might be here, because there's a smell of cannabis certainly as you come in here.
Ofcom test call. The date today is Monday the 29th of March 2010. The time is 15:09 hours, and we are in the Clash FM studio on Bunbury Industrial Estate.
Okay, you can see the configuration of the studio. You've got the two decks there, they've got CD players as well, and the mixer there. From the mixer, it goes through to the link transmitter. The cable then moves up and out through that part of the wall, and there will be an aerial or a microwave horn transmitter. The other side of that, which will beam it to their transmitter site, their main transmitter site, which is on a mobile telephone mast somewhere in Essex, fairly close to this studio.
The DJ from Clash FM now faces prosecution, 2 years in prison and an unlimited fine. Ofcom have carried out 21 of these raids in the last year and secured 26 prosecutions. But I couldn't help wondering how many actually resulted in links to serious crime. I spoke to Ofcom's head of licensing, Peter Davis. Are there any figures to prove the connection Pirate Radio has with crime, illegal activity?
We've got lots of evidence of links with illegal activity. I couldn't give you any specific figures because obviously they're on a sort of case-by-case basis, and we don't do by the nature of these things, we can't exactly audit their books.
Sarah Lockhart and Genius from Rinse FM.
It's just glamorisation. It's a much better story to talk about guns and drugs, no? This is just people that like radio. It's a bit geeky. We really like radio and playing music and having fun.
I mean, I can't imagine people that run around with guns and sell drugs and that have got time
to do a pirate radio.
This is not about money. It's not like we're not making millions of pounds out of doing radio, and I'm sure that drugs would make much more money and be like, what's the point of doing that if I'm going to do that? This is completely just about playing music.
But there are problems with illegal money being made from a section of pirate radio stations, whether that's money laundering or simply advertising club nights on the radio and taking cash on the door. It's all undeclared and therefore untaxed. There are also reports of tower block residents being threatened by pirate radio staff who want to use the roof as an aerial site. Richard Sovell is the Neighbourhoods Operation Manager for the London and Quadrant Housing Trust. His security staff suffered threatening behaviour from a pirate radio station.
From what I was reliably informed of, is that a couple of them did have knives and was actually holding it to the officers and asking them, you need to give us the keys to the gate that we had put on the stairwell that led to the roof area. And, the security guards refused to do that, but being unsuccessful, that's when they came back with angle grinders.
And I discovered something more disturbing talking to Keith Lee Bryan. He's run the illegal Station FM for nearly 20 years. It's a pirate, but he takes a rather surprising stance.
Pirate radio to me now is lost it.
What is wrong with pirate radio right now?
They do not accept that we have a youth culture problem. A lot of it got to do with the music, i.e. bling. It's all about bling, it's all about money that's made that nobody knows that's been
But isn't that the idea of pirate, that you can do what you want, that you can play what you want? That's the reason you're on an illegal station.
No, because you can't do what you want. You can't play what you want.
But a lot of the people on pirate radio aren't really quite adults. They're not mature individuals.
But
it's like there wasn't a lot for me to do when I was a kid. Music occupied a whole lot of my time, kept me off the streets, kept me out of trouble. What about the argument that all of these pirate radio stations that now exist are keeping kids occupied who would be doing bad things?
The pirate stations that right now, it's keeping them off the streets, but it's putting unnecessary fame to their heads.
And what's the result of that? What happens then?
The results of that, we're seeing it every day, Trevor. Guns, knives, Facebook, I'm going to shank you, I'm going to shoot you. We're seeing it live.
But are people saying this stuff on radio?
They're saying it on radio. I've listened to stations and I'm hearing messages sent. I've got children myself, so I hear what they're talking about. I know what they're talking about. I know the slang, right? I hear it all the time. We need to police it.
It is important to keep in perspective that not everybody in illegal broadcasting behaves this way. It's hard to tell exactly because Ofcom could only give us examples of links to crime and no exact figures. But for some people, pirate radio can still have a positive effect on a community. İpek Özerin lives and works in London's Turkish district and is a pirate radio fan. How would you sort of gauge the popularity of the Turkish pirate radio stations?
Amongst the young people, massive. I mean, the oldest running one, Bizim FM, has been going for 6 years, and in the last sort of 18 months we've had another 2 come on board. Every young person without exception listens to one of these stations. I don't hear of anyone listening. In fact, lots of people say that the LTR, London Turkish Radio, the legit one, is if you're a pensioner. For a lot of people, particularly the Turkish Kurds, they feel that station is a political line they don't like. It's quite Turkish nationalist, and it doesn't give a platform to younger people in the same way that the pirates do.
It sounds like a typical example of the whole ethos of pirate radio. A pirate radio station playing music that you couldn't possibly get on legal radio normally, like you know any commercial radio station or dare I say BBC station either. So how do you feel about the fact that a couple of DJs from Bizim FM have been arrested and charged?
I feel really sad. I happen to know the 2 boys involved, and they're lovely kids. They're passionate about their music. They're passionate about championing like the scene that they're involved with. For them, it wasn't about doing anything criminal. It was about, trying to give a platform to the things that they love. And I feel that they've been made scapegoats. I think that the powers that be are trying to hold them up and trying to put other people off.
But the arguments from Ofcom, messing with emergency frequencies, accepting illegal money or money for advertising, and they're not a legal station, etc., etc. How can you defend them?
Well, supply and demand. There is a demand for this kind of thing, and I think it's up to Ofcom and the authorities to help create legitimate platforms, affordable platforms for people to be able to do this. Now, ultimately, we still use our emergency services. Life keeps ticking along. It's like a lot of other things in life. Sometimes the law says it's wrong, but we all know that in everyday life, we don't see it as wrong.
So why not just go legal? Rinse FM are currently applying for a community licence themselves, but according to them, it's taken ages just to get the application together. Here's Sarah from the station.
It took me probably 2 years to pull that information together. We had to be pretty disciplined and pretty focused and pretty committed to do that. And, what we're going to get in return compared to what we've already got online is not that significant. And I think if the radio industry is interested in having further generations interested in it, there shouldn't be these hoops to jump through because young people will just look elsewhere.
İpek Özerin.
We looked at trying to get an FM licence and we were told that it wasn't possible. We were also told that there's an existing legitimate Turkish radio station, London Turkish Radio, which serves our community. And we were kind of pushed into the digital area, which is very costly. So for Bizim, the maths don't add up at the moment.
This problem, Peter, of pirate radio is not getting any better. It seems to be almost like a losing battle. It seems like the battle with cannabis in this country. We know there are lots of people who use it. You can't throw everyone in prison. Is it illegal? Is it not illegal? Because I believe illegal broadcasters don't actually feel they're doing that much wrong. And the fact that they have people who listen to them, they obviously don't feel they're doing that much wrong. Is there some compromise to be met here, or is it all or nothing?
The way that the law works at the moment, it is all or nothing. But what we're trying to do is encourage, where we can, pirate stations, particularly those who do want to go legal and who aren't carrying out all those other sorts of illegal activities, actually to try and get them licenses. But obviously they have to compete on a sort of level playing field with everybody else. We've held sort of various seminars with potential groups who are potentially interested in doing that, along with other community groups, to talk about the sort of ways that they can try to win licenses.
Well, since we last spoke to Rinse FM, they did finally get their community licence from Ofcom. They promised to keep to their pirate roots. It will be interesting to see if they can. Ofcom said that they provided strong evidence of demand for the service, as well as support from young people, the music industry and community organisations. But they're just one pirate out of 150, and it looks like we're at some sort of stalemate. In the current climate, I found today's pirate radio to be a complicated issue. Back when I was in the game, there were probably 15 pirates in London max. Now technology is so much cheaper and easier, it's made it possible for there to be over 150 nationwide. There are some bad people involved, and they need to be dealt with. And if there's links to violence and crime, then clearly that needs to be addressed too. But the spirit of pirate radio is alive and well. And there are some stations out there providing vital support to new British music, and in my eyes, that's a good thing. Don't forget, some of these people are the future of music and radio in this country. But things will change. I think the internet will have a big effect on pirate radio. Most pirates already stream on the internet. Some even have an iPhone app. But iPhones and the internet aren't as cheap and available as FM radio, especially to the youth. It'll be interesting to see what happens with the digital switchover when we're all supposed to leave FM behind and migrate to digital radio for good. Here's Ofcom's Peter Davis again.
Could well be that the switch to digital creates new opportunities for different types of radio station to come through on digital platforms, and we also need to think about, after switchover, what happens to the FM band.
So I was thinking there'll be millions of FM radio sets around, so won't the pirates just continue on FM?
It's a process that we've only just started thinking about. There's certainly an opportunity there for things to be done differently, and it could be that we see, a blossoming of hundreds of small radio stations involving lots of volunteers. That's certainly what we would like to do with FM, is to create much more freedom for small scale operators to get involved in radio and leave the sort of big guys on digital.
That sounds like good news for young radio and music enthusiasts. But the 2015 digital switchover, if indeed it ever happens, is a long way off. Until then, whether you like it or not, it seems pirate radio is here to stay.
You've been listening to Trevor Nelson investigating UK pirate radio. Do Pirates Rule the Airwaves was produced by James Hale.